The wind had teeth that morning. It came gnawing across the prairie, stirring up the scent of charred canvas and dried blood. Dust rolled low, curling in spirals like old smoke, and the sky hung too bright, too still, as if holding its breath for the dead. Elias Rourke tightened the reins with calloused fingers. His mule, a stubborn creature named Pearl, hesitated at the ridge, ears twitching toward the silence below. Silence like that wasn't natural, not out here. The prairie talked, even in grief. Crickets, the wind, the low huff of cattle far off. But here not a sound, not even the buzz of flies. Then he saw the wagon, or what was left of it, which splintered like bones, wheels cracked, canvas torn and blackened. Figures sprawled along the ground in stiff shapes, strewn like broken toys. Men, women, perhaps a child. He didn't count them. He never did. Elias dismounted slow, his boots whispering against the dry grass. He moved without hurry. Grief had taught him not to rush into ruin. He checked for life, because it was the thing you did, even when you were sure there wasn't any left to find. Then movement. A shape, small, curled beside the ruin like a dropped handkerchief. Pale dress streaked with soot and blood, one bare foot poking from beneath the hem. She lay still, but not stiff. There was breath, faint as a ghost sigh. He crouched beside her. Skin, like porcelain, left in the sun too long. The side of her head crusted with blood, but her chest rose, slow and sure. She was alive. "Ma'am," he said, voice rough from disuse. Her eyelids fluttered. No words came, just a flicker of awareness, the kind that recognizes pain before anything else. He could have left her. Might have been easier. But something in the way her hand curled near her heart, like she was holding tight to something the world hadn't taken yet, stopped him cold. He lifted her careful as winter glass. Back atop Pearl, she rested against him like she had nowhere else to go. She didn't. Not anymore. The ride home was quiet, save for the groan of saddle leather and the soft thump of hooves. He didn't speak. She didn't stir. Only once did she shift, a small sound escaping her throat, less than a word, more than a whimper. His cabin sat in the hollow of two low hills, tucked away from the main trail. It wasn't much, a single room with a lean-to shed and a crumbling fence around the back, but it held warmth and dry wood. It was all he had, and all he offered. He laid her in his bed, made tea with wild chamomile, boiled water for washing. When he came back, her eyes were open, clouded with pain and some far-off memory. But they watched him, quiet, steady. "You're safe," he said simply, setting the cup nearby. She blinked. No sign she understood. No sign she didn't. He didn't ask her name. That came in its own time. Outside, the dog barked once and lay back down. Jessie had dropped by earlier, left rabbit meat and a note about fence posts. Elias would thank him later. Now, he sat near the hearth and let the silence fill the room. It wasn't awkward. Silence, when it's honest, can be a kind of prayer. The woman slept. Not well. She twitched, flinched, murmured things that sounded more like rain than words. But she stayed breathing, and that was something. Morning came gray and full of dust. He cooked cornbread, left some by her side, and took his chore slow. By the second day, she sat up. By the third, she walked to the window and stood there long minutes, just staring at the hills. She hadn't spoken. Not until the fourth day. "I had a sister," she said, barely a breath. Elias turned. She was still by the window, hands clasped behind her back like a schoolteacher. Her voice had that clipped precision, like someone raised with books, not cows. "She didn't make it," she added, gaze not shifting. "I'm sorry," he said. She nodded once, as if accepting the apology on fate's behalf. She turned then, slowly, and studied him. He met her gaze without pressing. "Is this your land?" she asked. He nodded. "All of it. Enough of it." She seemed to take that in like a judge taking testimony. Her eyes, blue, sharp despite the bruises, narrowed slightly, not with suspicion, but thought. "I'm sold," she said. He nodded once. "Elias." They stood there for a breath too long. Then she sat. The days settled into rhythm. She did not ask to leave. He did not ask her to stay. That was the unspoken agreement between two people who had survived something they could not yet name. She read the only book on his shelf, a Bible with brittle pages. Not because she believed in it, she said one evening, but because the rhythm of old language calmed her. He watched her from the porch sometimes, while he carved fence posts or mended leather. The way she moved was cautious, like someone relearning the weight of her own skin. But there was steel beneath it. Not loud, not prideful, just quiet endurance. One afternoon, Jesse came riding up, all elbows and dust. "Folks heard about the wreck," he said, hopping off his pony. "Sheriff found tracks. Says it weren't no accident. Said they took what they wanted and burned the rest." Elias nodded. Jesse tilted his head toward the cabin. "She's the only one?" "The only one." "Guess that makes her lucky," the boy said. Elias didn't answer. Lucky wasn't a word he trusted. Later, he told her about the tracks, about the men who might have done it. She listened, eyes on the fire. "They'll come back," she said. He didn't ask how she knew. Some people just did. "You worried?" he asked. "No," she said. "I already died once." He didn't sleep that night. By the week's end, she was tending the small herb garden out back, weeding with ungloved hands. She never spoke of who she had been before, but the way she folded linens, the way she straightened her shoulders before entering a room, it whispered of a life more polished than this one. He didn't pry. He liked the quiet they shared, the way it held room for sorrow without asking for explanation. One evening, as they sat outside watching the sun bleed into the hills, she turned to him and said, "Thank you for not asking." He looked at her. "Some men would have needed to know who I was, what I had." "I saw enough," he said. She nodded. "Most people only see what's missing." He didn't reply. But inside something shifted. The wind came again that night, softer this time. It brought no scent of blood, only dust and the faintest trace of sage. In the dark, the woman slept without flinching. Elias sat by the window, watching the stars as they blinked into place. He didn't know what she would choose, whether she'd stay, whether she'd leave once her strength returned. But something in the way she said his name, soft as cloth, made him hope for the former. Not yet love, not even desire, just a name spoken like it mattered. And that was enough, for now. The morning broke with a hush, all silver mist and dew-slick grass, the kind of morning that carried no promises, only the weight of things unsaid. Elias stood at the fence line, boot soles damp, watching the mule nose a patch of stubborn wildflowers blooming despite the cold. Behind him, the cabin door creaked open. Isolde stepped out barefoot, hair still damp from washing. She wore a calico dress that belonged to Elias's late wife, loose at the shoulders, faded at the seams. It fit her like a borrowed memory, and for a second Elias looked away. "I swept," she said quietly. He nodded, brushing a thumb against the fence rail. "Didn't need doing. I needed something to do." That was the truth of it. She moved like a woman chased not by men, but by thoughts too loud to bear indoors. In the early days, she wandered the yard in circles. Not pacing, not restless, more like she was stitching something invisible back together. Elias let her. He didn't ask where she went in her mind. Grief had taught him that not all wandering was aimless. The days warmed slow. Isolde's cheeks grew less pale. Her eyes still held storms, but sometimes, when she laughed, rare, breathy, almost surprised, it broke through like sun between storm clouds. Those laughs weren't for Elias. Not yet. Sometimes for the dog. Once for a bird that landed too bold on the sill. She cooked when she could, burned biscuits, but brewed tea like a woman who'd poured from porcelain once upon a time. She was unaccustomed to rough work. Her hands blistered pulling water. But she never complained, never asked for softness. That Elias noticed most of all. One afternoon, she sat on the porch shelling beans, sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Elias came back from splitting wood and stood a moment, watching. "You could have been a schoolmarm," he said. "I was meant to be a baroness," she replied without looking up. The silence stretched thin. "My husband had a title," she added. "And debts. A dangerous combination." Elias didn't move. "We were traveling west to start over. He died of fever in Kansas. I carried on because, well, I didn't know how not to." Elias sat on the porch step, hands rough and blackened from bark. He didn't ask questions, just waited. There was a man on the wagon train, she continued, voice barely above the breeze. Said he knew my late husband, offered protection, said it was a cruel world for women alone. A pause. The beans clicked softly into the bowl. I didn't trust him. Should have trusted that. She didn't say what happened next. She didn't have to. Elias had seen the burn marks on her arms, the way her eyes jumped at the sound of boots too fast against floorboards. He's dead now, she said finally. I saw it in the smoke. And yet, I still dream of his hands. Elias stood quietly. He fetched her a jar of willow balm for the blisters. You don't need to tell it all at once, he said. She looked up. Then you believe me? I believe you were hurt, he said. That's enough. Something eased in her jaw, a tightness that had lived there since the first day he found her. She took the balm, not touching his fingers, but her eyes softened in thanks. The next day, she asked to help with the fence. You ever swung a hammer? He asked. I've swung worse, she said. They worked in the sun, sweat carving lines down her temples. She bent rusty nails straight with quiet resolve. He showed her how to wrap wire tight without slicing through palm or patience. Their words were few, but they moved in rhythm. That meant more. Later, she soaked her hands in cool water while he smoked his pipe on the stoop. My mother taught me French and piano, she said, staring into the basin, neither of which are particularly useful for fence mending. Elias let the smoke curl between them before answering. My wife couldn't ride a horse. Said they were too proud. Was she? More than the horse. Isolde smiled. A real one this time. It changed her face entirely, softened the aristocratic lines, made her look like a woman who could belong to this soil. You miss her, she said. I miss who I was when she looked at me, he replied. The wind picked up then, tugging at loose strands of her hair. You still carry her, she whispered. He nodded once. They didn't speak again until supper. The following week, Elias went into town for flour. Left early, rode back slow. When he returned, the garden had been weeded, and Isolde had patched the roof with old canvas and nails too long. Crooked, but holding. He chuckled. Roof's lookin' rebellious. She shrugged. Better than leaking. Inside she'd made stew. Oversalted, watery. He ate every bite. Over supper, she watched the fire, spoon idle in her bowl. What would I be here if I stayed? She asked softly. Elias didn't answer right away. The fire popped. The dog shifted beside the hearth. Whatever you chose, he said finally. She nodded. Her throat worked once. Then she asked, and what if I chose nothing yet? Then nothing is yours for now. The days grew longer. They settled into patterns without meaning to. She hung laundry on the line. He fixed the hinges she kept slamming. They argued once over how much salt to put in the pickling jar. She won. He let her. Jessie rode up again one afternoon, dusty and loud. Preacher says there's a family comin' west lookin' to hire help, he said. Could be good work for a woman. Housemaid sort. Isolde stood behind Elias in the doorway. Jessie nodded toward her. No offense, ma'am. None taken, she said coolly. Elias thanked him. Jessie tipped his hat and rode off. You want to go? Elias asked once they were alone. She shook her head. I don't want to serve anyone ever again. He nodded. Besides, she added, I've yet to tame that roof. They both laughed. Later that night, rain fell soft on the tin. Isolde sat in Elias's rocking chair, wrapped in a worn quilt. I dreamed of my sister, she said, voice low. She was chasing fireflies. We used to do that when we were girls. Before titles. Before men. Just two girls in a garden too wild for proper ladies. She blinked slow. I miss that garden. Elias poured 2 mugs of cider, handed her one. You're making a new one, he said. She looked down at her hands. Still healing, still rough. Doesn't feel like it. Roots take time. Outside, the rain deepened, steady as breath. The garden would drink well tonight. The land would remember her footprints. The fence would hold, crooked or not. And though neither said aloud, they both knew something was growing between them. Something unspoken, not yet blossomed, but real. It wasn't love. Not yet. But it was the place where love might someday come to rest. The storm rolled in quiet at first, a low rumble beneath the earth, like something ancient turning over in its sleep. The wind picked up without warning, snapping the clothesline and chasing dead leaves in frantic spirals across the yard. Elias moved without hurry, gathering the chickens, latching the shutters, checking the barn doors twice. The sky hung heavy above the hills, a tarnished silver bowl ready to tip. Inside, Isolde stirred the coals. Her dress was damp at the hem from the well, her cheeks flushed with the kind of warmth earned from work, not comfort. She had stopped flinching at thunder, stopped checking the door twice before bolting it. But her eyes still found the corners of the room when the dark pressed close. Elias handed her a folded blanket and sat down near the hearth. The flames cast long shadows, softening the worn lines of his face. He looked older in the firelight, but not weary, more like a stone shaped by river water, smoothed by seasons and silence. She broke it first. "I lied," she said, voice almost lost to the crackling logs. "Or not quite. I didn't tell all of it." He didn't move, just waited. "There were more men than I said. 6, maybe 7. Only one spoke directly to me, but I saw their eyes. The way they looked when they thought no one saw." Her hands curled around the blanket's edge. "They didn't come for money. Not just that. They came to see what they could take." Elias stared into the fire a long moment. Then, gently, "And what did they take?" She exhaled, slow and brittle. "What they could." It was not the words that shook him. It was the way she said them. Not with pain. Not even with anger. With the calm of someone who had stopped trying to carry something and had simply let it settle into her bones. He leaned forward, setting a kettle over the fire. "You don't have to carry it alone," he said. She looked at him, something sharp flickering behind her composure. "You think saying it aloud puts it down?" "No," he said. "But sometimes sharing the weight shifts how it presses." She didn't reply. Not for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was like water slipping through cracks. "I used to write letters. Every Sunday. Back in England. My sister would send lavender sachets tucked into hers. She said they kept the rot from growing in dark places." Elias nodded. "Did it help?" "No," she said, laughing softly. "But it smelled nice." He poured 2 mugs of tea, handed her one. Their fingers didn't touch, but the space between them felt warmer for it. "My wife used to sing to herself when she made bread," he said after a beat. "Never to me. Just to the dough. Said it helped it rise." "Did it?" "Some days." They sat in the hush, letting the storm fill the silence between thoughts. After a while, Isolde spoke again. "I hated being a baroness." Elias looked over. Too many rules. Too many eyes. Everything had a proper way. The right fork. The right laugh. Even grief had choreography. You couldn't cry unless someone higher born went first. Her mouth twisted into something not quite a smile. "When my husband died, I felt relief before sorrow. That's how I knew I could never go back." "And now?" he asked. "Now I wear a dress that smells of wood smoke. I curse at splinters. I have blisters and calluses. And no one looks at me like they own me." She sipped the tea, closed her eyes. "Do you ever think you were meant for another life?" she asked. "No," Elias said. "I think I was meant to live through this one." Something inside her softened at that. Or maybe it broke. Whichever it was, her shoulders slumped like she'd set down a load she hadn't realized she was still carrying. The storm swelled. Wind howled against the shutters, and rain pattered sharp against the roof. But inside it was warm and still, 2 shadows seated close to a fire. That night, neither of them slept. Sometime past midnight, Isolde wandered to the barn. Elias found her there an hour later, sitting in the hayloft with her arms around the old dog. "I used to be afraid of barns," she said, without turning. "Too many corners. Too many shadows. And now, I think they're just houses that forgot how to speak." He climbed up beside her. They didn't talk after that. Just sat in the scent of straw and rain, the dog nestled between them, snoring like a small engine. The next morning brought a kind of quiet that followed only after storms. Birds moved slow through the wet branches, and the sun blinked down like a child waking late. Isolde stood barefoot in the garden, inspecting the damage: snap stems, flattened beans, a tulip bent in half. Elias brought her coffee in a tin mug. She took it without speaking. "I'll help you replant," he said. She looked over her shoulder. Her hair was unbraided, curls damp from fog. "I know." They worked side by side that afternoon, knees in the mud. She hummed a tune under her breath, nothing sweet or composed, just a low sound to fill the spaces where silence might settle too deep. Later, while he mended the coop, she walked to the ridge above the house and stood there a long while, staring out where the horizon melted into haze. When she returned, her face had changed. Not by much, just the slightest lifting of the brow, a less guarded tilt of the chin. "Someone came up the trail," she said. Elias stood. "Who?" "I don't know. Just watched." Then turned back. He moved to the door, scanning the trees, the slope beyond. "Nothing." Isolde joined him, arms crossed against the chill. "Could have been nothing," she said. "But your gut says different." She nodded. He rested his hand on the post beside her. "You're not alone now." "I know," she whispered. That night, she didn't sleep in the bed. She brought her blanket to the hearth, curled on the rug near the embers. Elias watched her from his chair. He didn't ask why. He just laid his own blanket over her before dousing the lamp. She was asleep before he turned away. In the dark, the house didn't feel so empty. Not broken, not whole, but mending. And somewhere in the silence, something new began to bloom, not between their bodies, not yet, but in the thin place between grief and grace. A knowing, a trust, a beginning without fanfare. It wasn't love, still not yet, but it was where love begins, quiet as rain in soil. The sound came just past dusk, hooves slow and deliberate, beating a hollow rhythm against the ground. Not like Jesse's erratic gallop or the lazy saunter of a passing traveler. These were different, purposeful, measured, each beat closer than the last. Elias heard them before Isolde did. He was on the porch, sharpening a blade he hadn't used in years, the kind of tool that had once served to cut wood, rope, and, on a hard winter's night, more than either. The dog raised its head and growled low, not at the sound, but at the scent that rode in on the air. Smoke, sweat, metal. Inside, Isolde moved like a shadow, hands steady as she reached for the iron kettle, pretending it was just another evening. But her shoulders told the truth. They curled inward, braced. She didn't ask. She knew. Elias rose and took a step toward her. "You said they come." She nodded once. "I hoped I was wrong." He didn't ask where she wanted to hide. She didn't offer to run. That was behind her now, the flight, the trembling. Tonight, she stood tall in a dress still damp from washing, her hair braided back with the same hands that had stitched wounds and planted tulips. Elias handed her the rifle. "Do you remember how?" She looked at the weapon, then at him. "No," she said, "but I'll learn fast." He nodded. No words wasted on promises he couldn't keep. The dog growled again, deeper this time. The first man appeared at the edge of the trees, the setting sun making a devil's halo behind his hat. He was followed by two more, none of them familiar to Elias, but Isolde's sharp breath told him enough. One of them had worn a red scarf around his wrist once. He wore it still, a totem, or maybe a trophy. They stopped at the fence, said nothing, just looked. Elias stepped forward, slow. "This land's taken." The man in the middle spat into the dirt. "We're not here for the land. You'll get nothing else." The man smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. "She owes us." Isolde stepped outside then, the rifle at her side, but not raised. She moved with the quiet grace of someone long finished with begging. "I don't owe you a thing," she said, "least of all fear." The man's smile vanished. "You've got a pretty mouth for a corpse." Elias didn't move, didn't speak. He waited. The second man reached for something at his belt, too fast, too loud. The gunshot rang out before Elias had taken a step. Not his. Isolde stood still, the rifle's barrel warm in her hand, smoke curling from the muzzle like breath in cold air. The man dropped where he stood, A surprised grunt cut off mid-sound. The others didn't run. That was the dangerous kind. The ones who didn't blink when blood spilled. The red-scarred man snarled, pulled his own pistol, and ducked behind the broken fence post. Elias moved then, not with speed, but with certainty. He ducked low, rolled behind the water trough, and fired. Wood splintered. A shout. Another shot cracked the silence, missed by inches. The dog lunged, teeth bared, catching the third man's leg before the man could fire. A scream. A struggle. Elias was there before the scream finished, blade in hand, and the fight was over as fast as it began. Only one man left. The one with the red scarf. He stood now, halfway between fear and fury, gun shaking in his hand, aimed square at Isolde. "You think this ends with me?" he shouted. "You think you'll sleep safe?" Isolde didn't speak. She didn't flinch. Elias stepped behind the man, slow, deliberate. "She already does." The man turned too late. The fight was brief, messy. No art to it. Just fists and bone, and the dull thud of men who know what it is to survive. When it ended, Elias stood, chest heaving, knuckles bleeding. The man groaned at his feet. Isolde picked up the man's gun, checked the chamber. She didn't point it, just held it. Her eyes never left him. "We let the sheriff take care of him," Elias said. "Let the law bury what's left." She nodded. By the time Jesse arrived with the sheriff, drawn by the echo of gunfire and instinct, the bodies were covered, and the red-scarred man was tied to the post he'd once leaned on like a king. The sheriff didn't ask many questions. He saw what he needed to see. As they led the man away, Isolde stood by the porch, arms crossed, lips pressed tight. The lawman looked back once. "You're welcome in this town," he said. "Both of you. If you ever need." Elias nodded. Didn't say a word. When they were gone, silence returned. Not the strained quiet of threat, but the soft, sacred hush that follows release. The kind of silence that lives inside churches and cradle songs. Isolde sat on the steps, the rifle across her knees. Her fingers traced the wood. Not shaking. Not now. "I thought I'd feel something," she said. "After. Relief, maybe. Justice. But it's just over," Elias finished. She looked up at him. "Is it?" He sat beside her, letting their shoulders touch. "Not accident. Not chance." "You ever burned a stump?" he asked. She shook her head. "Burn it fast, roots stay. Grow back. You want it gone, you hollow it out. Then burn from the inside. Slow. Quiet." She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of ash and earth. "Feels like I've been burning from the inside for years." He nodded. "But now it's hollow." She smiled faintly. "And maybe there's room now." They didn't say what for. The stars came out slow, one by one, like stories whispered by old voices across time. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of rain, wood smoke, and lavender, faint, but there. Inside the house, the fire waited. So did sleep. So did morning. But for now, they sat in the quiet hollow, between pain and peace. And the flame between them, small, steady, undeniable, lit the dark not with fire or fury, but something older. Something beginning. Snow fell like ashes from a long-dead fire, drifting soft and soundless across the prairie as dusk drew its pale veil over the world. The barn stood at the edge of that cold, wind-swept silence, half-rotted, leaning with age, its slats groaning against each other in protest of another hard winter. No light came from inside. No smoke, no fire, no welcome. Just a woman curled against the splintered wall, shivering as the wind found every gap in the wood. They had left her there at twilight, as if abandoning a thing too broken to bury. Clara Whitley had been many things, a soldier's wife, a battlefield nurse, a stranger in too many towns to name, but she had never been this before. Forsaken. Not just forgotten, but intentionally cast away like rotted bread. Her lips were split, her fingers trembling as she tried to tuck the threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders. It was the only thing they'd let her keep. That, and the small wooden brooch shaped like a sparrow that her husband had carved on the front lines at Shiloh. She held it now, fingers numb and stiff. "I did what I could," she had whispered to them. "I did what I was trained to do." But the boy had died. Fever had eaten him from the inside, and though Clara had wiped his brow, bled her knowledge into every tincture and wrap, it hadn't been enough. He died with his mother wailing and a crowd growing outside the door. Someone had muttered, which beneath their breath. Another said death follows her. No one said thank you. The barn was their solution. No gallows, no grave. Just a quiet place to freeze. She coughed, dry, ragged. A wind-threaded sound. Her chest ached from it. She had no firewood, no matches. Only a dented tin flask and a crust of bread that had gone too hard to chew. Her boots had holes. Her hope had hollows. Outside, the wind picked up. The prairie, wide as God's own sigh, whispered secrets in grasses no one had stepped through in weeks. Somewhere beyond the barn walls, coyotes howled. Clara closed her eyes and pressed her cheek to her knees. Her breath came slow, shallow. Each exhale felt like surrender. She didn't expect to wake, but she did. Morning didn't arrive with warmth. It came gray and sharp. The sun filtered through ice-laced clouds. Clara opened her eyes to find a blanket covering her shoulders, thick, not hers. Real fur, warm as breath. She blinked, sat up too fast. Her head spun. No one in sight. Only fresh snow. A few faint tracks that led back toward the tree line. Boot prints, not settler-made. Narrower, softer. She reached for the fur, held it close. By midday, a leather-wrapped bundle appeared at the barn door. Inside, thinly sliced venison, smoked, and a small, corked gourd of tea. Piney, bitter. She drank it greedily, her stomach twisting as it remembered hunger. Still no one came. On the third day, she tried to walk. Her legs failed her, folded like paper. She crawled to the barn's edge and looked out. He was there, sitting on a rock beside a birch tree, still as a carving, wrapped in a buffalo hide coat, long hair falling loose down his back. He did not meet her gaze, did not move, just watched the horizon as if waiting for something more important than her. Clara swallowed and dragged herself back inside. Her pride, like everything else, was worn thin. Yet some ember within her flickered. Not of love, not yet, but of confusion. Why? She had learned early that kindness was rarely free. Another night passed. She dreamt of her husband for the first time in years. Not the man he'd been at the start, young, laughing, full of apple pie and sermons, but the ghost he became by the end. Gaunt, cold, blood on his shirt, eyes distant. She woke sweating, heart pounding. By then, she knew the man was still watching. She pushed open the barn door and stood in it, shaking. Her voice barely carried. "You can come in, if you mean to." No reply. But that night, another bundle came. Rabbit stew this time, still warm. Her strength returned in inches. She began to walk the perimeter of the barn, leaning on a crooked stick. She found where the wind was weakest. Rearranged hay to keep her back warmer at night. She moved like a woman half-born, unsure if the world still wanted her. And every day he came. Not close, not speaking, just there. It was the most attention she'd received from a man since the war. Days blurred, her hair matted, her dress thinned. Her eyes began to adjust to the way light moved in this lonely corner of the prairie. On the 10th morning, she stepped out and he was closer, 20 feet, maybe. Still silent, still watching the sky. Clara sat near him, not beside him. The wind moved gently between them, like a word neither knew how to say. She cleared her throat. Why? He turned slightly, just enough to show he'd heard. His voice, when it came, was deep, weathered. "You looked left behind." She stared at him. His English was slow, but clear. "I was." He nodded, as if that answered something for both of them. Not anymore. Silence stretched again. Not awkward, reverent, somehow. Like a chapel. She studied him then. His cheekbones, strong and sharp. A scar across his brow. He looked like the kind of man who didn't flinch, didn't shout. She couldn't remember the last time she'd met a man who didn't speak like he owned the air. "You Cheyenne?" she asked. He nodded once. "You got a name?" He didn't answer right away. Then to Sonny. "What's it mean?" He paused, eyes softening. "Snowhawk." She smiled for the first time in weeks. It hurt her face. The next day, he was gone before she woke. But beside the barn door, someone had stacked a ring of stones around a fresh fire pit. A gift. A gesture. That night, Clara lit a flame for the first time since they'd thrown her here. She sat near it and whispered stories to the wind about her father's garden, her mother's hymns, the girl she used to be before uniforms and gunpowder taught her to bleed for strangers. She spoke low, not knowing if he listened from the dark. But somehow she felt heard. The stars blinked down like distant promises. The barn no longer felt like a coffin, but a waiting room. And Clara, wrapped in fur not her own, no longer prayed for sleep. She listened instead, to wind, to fire, to silence, to the sound of something beginning. And far off in the dark, a man who had seen too much loss whispered her name into the stillness, as if testing how it might feel to keep it. The first time she saw him up close, he was crouched by the stream that curved like a ribbon around the cottonwoods, his hand steady as he cleaned a rabbit with the quiet grace of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. Clara didn't speak. She watched from the trees, hidden by the frost-gloved branches, breath clouding in front of her. Snow still clung to the banks, but the water moved sure and constant, just like him. His movements were neither rushed nor hesitant. Everything he did seemed chosen, as if even his silences had roots. She hadn't planned to follow him, not really. But something in her had needed to know what kind of man leaves meat and medicine for a stranger, but asks for nothing in return. She crept back to the barn before he turned. That night he didn't come. The next morning, she found a line of cedar branches laid out in a row outside the barn. At the end of them sat a carved stick, plain, smooth by hand, but the shape of a hawk feather notched at the tip. An invitation, or a trail, perhaps both. She followed it with care. What she found wasn't a house, but a lodge, half hidden beneath a rise in the land, ringed with snow-packed stones and covered in layered hides. Smoke drifted from a small vent above, fragrant with sweetgrass and pine. The scent tugged something loose in her chest. Memory maybe, or longing. He stood in the doorway, as if he'd known she'd come. Her steps faltered, boots sinking into snow. "You brought me back," she said softly. Tasani didn't nod, didn't smile, just moved aside. She hesitated, then crossed the threshold. Warmth, dim and flickering, wrapped around her. The fire was modest but clean. A pot hung above it, something fragrant bubbling inside. The lodge was spare, tools on hooks, for pelts stacked in a corner, a hand-woven mat where he slept. Nothing wasted, nothing useless. She hovered by the entrance. "I didn't come to stay." Still, he brought her a carved wooden bowl and ladled stew into it. Rabbit again, with wild onion and something rooty and sharp. She accepted it, hands trembling only a little. He sat across from her, close enough to feel but not touch. No questions, no small talk. She ate. They didn't speak for a long while. At last, she broke the hush. "You don't ask anything." He looked at her, eyes dark as river stone. "Why would I?" "Because people do. They want stories, names. They want to know why I'm alone." He stirred the fire with a stick. Sparks fluttered up like fireflies. "I saw you in the barn. That was enough." She set her bowl down. Her voice came like dry wind. "I was trying to help a boy. He died. His people blamed me. I used to be a nurse. During the war. But out here, that means nothing." Tasani's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. Clara's fingers tightened in her lap. "They called me cursed." He looked at her then, not with pity, but something steadier, as if the word had no weight in his world. "Some things die even when you do everything right." The quiet between them shifted, softened. She nodded once, tears brimming but not falling. They became a rhythm after that. Not daily, but frequent. She never stayed long in the lodge, never slept there. She returned to the barn each night, clinging to that scrap of independence like it was armor. But she visited, helped stir broth, sorted dried herbs. He never stopped her, never corrected her touch. He just worked beside her like they'd done this all their lives. Once, he brought her a bundle of crushed cedar needles and mint. "For breathing," he said. Good after fever. Your mother teach you? He nodded. And her mother before. She wanted to ask more about his people, where they'd gone, if they were safe, but she sensed that answers weren't his way. His stories lived in his hands, not his mouth. One morning, Clara caught her reflection in a pond thawing at the edge of the woods. Her cheeks had color again. Her eyes, though shadowed, had light. She smoothed her hair as best she could, pressing down the wild edges. It startled her to care how she looked. That evening, she arrived at the lodge and found him sitting outside, working with a knife on a piece of bone. He handed her a small shape, a bird mid-flight, its wings arched as if catching a breeze. She stared at it. It's beautiful. He only shrugged. It's yours. Why? You carry birds in your eyes, he said simply. On days when you look up. Clara laughed. It came out startled, bright. He didn't join in. Just watched her with that calm steadiness, like her laughter was rare and worth memorizing. Later, as they sat beside the fire, she asked, "Do you ever miss talking more?" "No," he said. "Too many words. People forget to feel." She didn't answer. She couldn't argue. A snowstorm came through that night, hissing and brutal. The barn's roof groaned beneath the weight. She curled beneath the fur he'd given her, but the cold bit deep. Morning didn't bring sun. Just gray fog and a sharp wind. She made her way to the lodge anyway. Tisani had made 2 cups of tea, pine and elderflower, and had set them out before she even crossed the rise. She sat, boots soaked, hands raw. He passed her the cup. "I dreamed of fire," he said suddenly. "Last night." She tilted her head. "What kind of fire?" "One that doesn't burn. Just stays. Even when wind comes." He looked at her then, and something unspoken passed between them. She didn't know what it was, but she wanted to. That night, she didn't return to the barn. She curled near the fire in the lodge, eyes half-lidded, warmth seeping into her bones. He didn't ask, didn't touch. He just laid another log on the fire and sat beside her. When she woke, the snow had stopped. The world was white and hushed. Outside, the sun painted the land in gold and silver, and Clara, for the first time in months, didn't feel like a thing discarded. She looked over at him, still asleep, one hand resting near the fire, face calm. She whispered, as if testing the air, "Tisani." He stirred slightly, but didn't wake. She smiled. Not for him. Not for anyone. Just because. And the wind, passing through the branches above the lodge, carried the sound like a promise, waiting to be kept. The wind shifted in late February, gentler now, like the land had softened beneath its own breath. Days grew longer, the cold less cruel. Sap stirred in the trees. And in the quiet shelter of a lodge made of hides and stone, 2 people learned how to live in each other's presence without unraveling. Clara no longer thought of the barn, not the smell of moldy straw, nor the splinters in her back, nor the way her name had tasted like pity in the settlers' mouths. The ache was still there, buried under the surface, but the sharpness had dulled. Pain, when shared in silence, seemed to lose its edges. She rose each morning before the sun, stepping outside to breathe the clean bite of air, while Tisani worked with his hands. He carved, stitched, or stirred broth, always purposeful, always present. There was a steadiness to him, a patience she hadn't known she'd been craving until it began to shape the way her shoulders sat. She no longer hunched, no longer winced when spoken to. Her silence, once a shield, became a kind of thread between them. She mended his shirt one morning, careful stitches lining a tear near the shoulder. He watched her from the corner of the lodge, cross-legged, sharpening a tool he'd shaped from elk horn. "You sew like you're healing a wound," he said. She glanced up, smiled faintly. "It's all the same, really. You close something. You hope it holds." That was how they spoke, light touches, never too much. As if their words were stones placed in a circle around something fragile and flickering. A life rebuilt. She began collecting things, roots, bark, the first signs of spring tucked beneath snowbanks. She pressed them in strips of cloth, drying them by the fire. When he brought in a shallow cut on his hand, she crushed yarrow leaves between her fingers and made a paste, wrapping the wound with slow, practiced care. He watched her with that quiet attention that never tried to take more than she gave. "You were a healer," he said, "before?" She nodded. "Intense. Battlefield camps. I was 20 and thought I could stop the dying if I just tried hard enough." His eyes softened, but he said nothing. "There was a boy once," she continued, 14. His leg was gone below the knee. He kept asking where his mother was, over and over. Her voice thinned. "She died days before. I couldn't tell him." Tisani reached across the space between them and laid 2 fingers lightly on her wrist. He didn't try to fix the memory, didn't give her hollow words. Just let her know he'd heard it. That night, the fire crackled low, and she sang softly, an old lullaby her mother had hummed while darning socks. Her voice wasn't beautiful, but it was true. He closed his eyes to it. They didn't sleep side by side. Not yet. But they no longer felt the need to define the distance. One day, after a long silence, he spoke of his father. Was a hunter, fierce, but gentle when I was small. He'd carve birds in the snow with a stick and tell me their names. She leaned her head to the lodge wall, watching the flames twist. "What happened?" "White sickness," he said. "Came with the traders. Took him in 3 days." She looked at him, slow and steady. "I'm sorry." He shrugged once, not dismissing it, but folding it away. "Pain makes a shape in you," he said. "You carry it, or it carries you." They shared their sorrows like that, not as confessions, but as offerings. Nothing demanded, nothing rushed. The snow began to retreat. Grass peeked through in patches. A pair of robins nested near the lodge, and Clara watched them for hours, listening to the chirps as if they held secrets. Tisani brought her a wooden comb he'd carved, smooth and curved like the moon. "For your hair," he said simply. She ran it through the dark strands that fell past her shoulders, untangling knots without pain. "You see me," she said, voice soft. He met her eyes. "You've always been there. Just needed warmth to come back." She didn't answer, but her fingers reached across the fire and brushed his hand. Spring announced itself in thawed rivers and early wildflowers. Clara found herself laughing again at the stubbornness of a squirrel, at her own clumsy steps as she learned to balance baskets on her hip. Her face colored with sun. Her hands grew calloused in new ways. They fished together, moved quietly through woods where birds sang without fear. He taught her how to listen, not just with ears, but with breath and skin. When they sat beneath a cedar tree, and he told her how the old stories said women carried stars in their blood, she wept without warning. Not from sadness, but from the way the words felt like balm. There were no grand confessions, no kisses stolen under moonlight, just hands meeting in shared work, just glances that lingered longer than they had to, just the comfort of knowing someone would still be there when you turned around. One night, the sky opened with rain, steady and soft. They stood outside, arms bare, heads tilted up. Clara closed her eyes and let it wash her, as if the past could be rinsed clean. When she opened them, Tisani was watching her, not with hunger, not with pity, but with reverence. Like she was something rare the world had nearly forgotten. He spoke, barely above the rain. "You belong to the earth again." She stepped toward him, slowly. "And if I wanted to belong here with you?" His breath caught. But he didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he opened the lodge flap and let her step through first. And inside, where the fire hummed low and their silence was the softest kind of song, she began to believe in beginnings. Not in love yet, but in its shape, in its shelter, in the way 2 people bruised and bone-tired could build a quiet refuge from the world's sharp edges. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, something else was growing, something neither of them dared name, but both had started to tend. The valley had grown lush by April, grass rising in soft waves, pale wildflowers threading through the rocks like forgotten lace. Birds returned in earnest, their songs bright and insistent. Clara spent her mornings near the stream, washing linens, steeping herbs, planting root bundles into damp earth. The rhythm was hers now, a quiet, grounded kind of life stitched with small comforts and earned silences. But peace rarely lasted in the open country. Not when the world beyond the trees still measured worth by names and pasts. She saw the rider first through a shimmer of heat rising off the land. Alone, slouched in the saddle, rifle slung across his back. His coat was patched with dust and travel, his hat pulled low. She stiffened, the wash basket at her hip trembling slightly. Her first thought was of wolves. Her second was worse. By the time he reached the edge of the glade, Clara had stepped between him and the lodge. The man didn't dismount. He narrowed his eyes. "Well, I'll be," he muttered. "Thought they were telling ghost tales." Clara stood still, her voice calm. "You're from the town?" He nodded, lifting the brim of his hat. His face was narrow, his jaw uneven with stubble. "Samuel Briggs, trapper. I was there when they threw you out." Her chest tightened. "Then you know why I don't intend to go back." Briggs shrugged. "Didn't say I blamed you. But others, preacher and such, don't like stories traveling. Word got out. Folks say you're living with a savage, raising a camp like it's decent." Her spine stiffened. "I'm living. That's more than they allowed." He spit into the grass. "They'll want proof. Might come up this way. Ain't no law out here, but you know how men get when their pride feels poked." He turned his horse before she could reply, leaving behind a path of bent grass and a bad taste in the air. That night, she told Tasani. He listened, silent as always, eyes unreadable in the firelight. "They think I belong to them," she said, hands clenched in her lap. "They couldn't kill me, so now they want to rewrite me. Pretend I never left. Or punish me for doing so." Tasani added a log to the fire, watching it catch. "You afraid?" She shook her head slowly. "I'm tired." He nodded once, as if that was the more honest thing. "We could move farther," he offered. "There are places west with deeper woods. No trails." She looked around the small space they'd built together. The bundles of herbs, the carved tools, the hanging strips of dried meat. The life that had grown in the cracks. "I don't want to run." He didn't press. He never did. Over the next few days, she noticed the change in him. Not fear, just a quiet tension. He ranged wider when hunting, checked the horizon more often, sharpened his knives with slower care. Clara spent the time gathering. She packed medicine bundles, organized roots, boiled bark into tinctures. Not because she expected blood, but because she knew healing wasn't something you did after. It was something you prepared for in advance. The men came on the fourth day. There were 5 of them, 2 on horseback, 3 on foot. The preacher led them, Reverend Markley, thick in the chest, his mouth always half filled with scripture and judgment. Behind him, Briggs again, eyes low. The rest were rough-set men Clara had seen once or twice around the edge of town, men who followed loud voices. She stood outside the lodge as they approached, arms crossed, the sun casting her shadow long over the grass. Tasani stood a few steps behind her, still quiet, a long knife resting against his hip, but unsheathed. "Miss Whitley," the preacher said, not bothering with courtesy. "You've caused quite the stir." She said nothing. He gestured toward the lodge. "You've taken up with a heathen, turned your back on good folks who gave you shelter." "You gave me a barn," she replied evenly, "and left me there to die." Murmurs flicked through the group. The preacher frowned. "You brought that on yourself. You cursed the boy." "No," she said, voice rising just slightly. "I tried to save him. You needed someone to blame. And I was a widow. Alone. Easier than facing your own helplessness." The men shifted uncomfortably. Briggs looked away. "We're not here to argue," Markley said. "We've come to bring you home. The decent way." "I have a home." "With a savage?" he spat. "This isn't love. It's sickness. Confusion. Come now, Clara. You can be forgiven. The church will." "I don't want your forgiveness," she said. The silence after that was heavy. The preacher stepped forward. "I won't ask again." At that, Tasani moved, slowly, deliberately, stepping beside her. He didn't speak, but the message was clear. This was not a woman alone. The preacher reached for his rifle, and Clara moved faster. She stepped in front of Tasani, hand raised. Her voice cracked through the air like thunder over still water. "No." They froze. "I won't let you twist this into something ugly. You threw me away." He sheltered me, fed me, let me grieve without shame. I owe you nothing. Markley's face flushed deep. You'll regret this. All of you. Clara turned to the other men. Do any of you really believe this is justice? That dragging me away from the first safe place I've known is some kind of salvation? One of the younger ones, a farm boy, barely more than 20, shifted his weight. His eyes flicked between Clara and the preacher. Preacher, he said, hesitating, she looks well. Better than before. The preacher turned on him. You doubt the word? I doubt your age, the boy muttered. Another silence fell. In the end they left. All of them. Even the preacher, grumbling threats like a man whose sermon had been ignored one too many times. Clara didn't move until they were gone. Tisani placed a hand lightly on her back. You didn't run, he said. She looked up at him. Neither did you. They spent that night inside the lodge, the fire steady, no fear between them. Clara wrapped her arms around her knees and stared at the flames. They'll come again, she said. He nodded. Then we'll meet them again. Not as fugitives. Not as beggars. But as people who had made a life stitched from scraps and silence, held together by something deeper than fear. Outside, the wind carried no sermon, only the soft, defiant song of the valley. The sun broke over the valley like spilled gold, turning dew to diamonds on every blade of grass. Clara stood barefoot outside the lodge, her hair braided back, a clean linen apron tied around her waist. Her hands were stained with bark and roots, signs of a healer's work, not of hiding. She breathed in the scent of cedar smoke and early wildflowers. The land was waking, and so was she. But peace never holds its breath forever. By mid-morning, they came again. 12 this time. Not just the preacher and his bitter flock, but armed men from neighboring ranches, men with something to prove. Dust rose beneath their horses like warning smoke. Guns strapped to saddles. Hat brims low. They brought their law in numbers, but not in justice. Clara saw them first. She didn't flinch. She pressed one hand to her chest and walked inside the lodge. Tisani sat at the fire, mending a leather satchel with clean, sure stitches. He didn't look up, but his voice was calm. They've come to take. Clara nodded once. And we'll let them leave empty. He set down the leather, stood, and reached for his knife, not in rage, but in readiness. But she stepped in front of him, her hand light on his chest. No blood, she whispered. Not for them. Let me speak. He searched her face. What he saw there made him still. They only understand force, he said softly. Then let them feel the kind that doesn't break bones. The riders pulled up 20 feet from the lodge. Dust settled. Guns rested loosely in hands. The preacher dismounted, boots hitting the ground like gavel strikes. Clara Whitley, he called. You've had your time to play savage. This is your last chance. Come with us now or be taken. Clara stepped into the light, not hidden, not trembling. Her voice rose like a hymn, slow and clear. You came with fire in your hands, she said. But fire's not the enemy. Fire warms the lost. Fire feeds the sick. Fire is what saved me when your hatred left me to freeze. Markley narrowed his eyes. Don't dress your shame in poetry. You defy the order of God. I defy the order of men who forgot how to be kind. Gasps flickered through the crowd, but she didn't falter. You called me cursed because you couldn't save a dying boy. You buried your failure in my body, but I carried it. I buried him in prayer when no one else would, and I grieved alone while you went back to your Sunday comfort. Briggs shifted in his saddle, jaw tight. Someone behind him lowered their rifle slightly. Tisani stepped beside her now. No weapon drawn, just presence, quiet and unwavering. Markley's voice sharpened. He's bewitched you. You think this is love? This is desecration. Clara looked up at Tisani, not for approval, but for truth. Then back at them all. This man built me a fire when yours tried to consume me. He gave me silence when your words bruised. He never touched me without reverence. And he saw the woman you threw away as someone worth saving. Tisani didn't speak. He didn't need to. His stillness said enough. Markley raised his hand. She's too far gone. A man at his right flinched, reaching for his rifle. And, in one breathless moment, time cracked. A shot rang out, loud, sudden, sharp. Clara cried out, not in pain, but in shock. A grazing burn across her upper arm bloomed red. She stumbled. Tasani caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her to him as if the world were shattering. His hand hovered at his knife, but she gripped his wrist. No. Blood trickled down her sleeve. Her voice was hoarse. Don't give them what they want. The man who fired stepped back, ashamed, hand shaking. Markley looked shaken, but tried to recover. You see what he lets happen to you? Clara pulled herself upright. Her arm throbbed, but her gaze stayed steady. This wound came from your man, not mine. Someone in the crowd, a rancher with a tired face, spoke low but loud enough. She's right. Another added, we came for peace, not murder. The preacher turned, his fury unraveling. She's dangerous. She's bleeding, the farm boy said. And still standing. Maybe she ain't the one who's lost. A ripple moved through them. Uncertainty. The kind that precedes retreat. Clara turned, opened the flap of the lodge, and walked inside. The fire still burned low. She dipped a cloth in cool water and pressed it to her arm. They watched her from the outside. All of them. She did not cower. She did not cry. Tasani stepped out after her, arms crossed. You heard her, he said. She's not leaving. No threats. No raised weapon. Just fact. Markley stood alone now. No one met his eyes. He spat in the dirt, turned to his horse, and climbed back into the saddle. You'll answer to God, he muttered. Clara stepped out once more. I already have. And he sent me here. The men left in silence. No gunfire. No more blood. When they were gone, Clara sank to the ground, her good hand pressed to the earth. The air smelled like smoke and sweat and wild mint. And peace. Tasani knelt beside her, his forehead touching hers. They will not come again, he said. No, she whispered. They won't. He gently unwrapped the soaked cloth and reached for the healing salve she'd made 3 days earlier. She smiled through the pain. You're learning. He met her eyes. I had a good teacher. They stayed that way, quiet, the wind slipping soft through the valley, healing each other in ways no one else had ever dared. Weeks passed. Spring unfolded. Children from distant families began to find their way to Clara, scraped knees, coughs, worried mothers brave enough to seek her care. She didn't ask for coin, just listened, taught, held space. Tasani carved toys for the little ones. Hawks, rabbits. Once a woman. They never married under paper or priest. But their union was written in firelight and footsteps, in the tender habit of shared silence. Clara grew herbs near the stream, hung linens between 2 cedar poles. Her laugh was unguarded now, her steps confident. Her past remained a shadow behind her, but it no longer swallowed the light. One night, under a sky woven with stars, she stood beside Tasani, arms folded as they looked out over the valley. Do you think they remember me? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. No, he said. They remember the woman they made, not the one you became. She nodded, breathing in deep. Good, she said. Let her stay gone. He looked at her then. Like the earth does the rain it waited all season for. She took his hand, and together they walked back into the light of their fire. A fire no hate could put out. A fire they couldn't burn.